October 14th, 1944. Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky, the edge of the world. Captain James Mitchell stood on the frozen strip with his collar pulled tight, breath turning to white smoke that vanished instantly in the Arctic wind. The thermometer outside the operations hut read -20 degrees, and the metal under his boots felt brittle, like it might crack if struck too hard. Somewhere behind him, a generator coughed and sputtered, fighting the cold just to stay alive. 5,000 miles from Minnesota, Mitchell wondered, briefly, uselessly, how a farm boy who learned to fly in open cockpit trainers had ended up here, handing over American fighters to Soviet pilots who spoke no English and lived in a different war entirely. The aircraft waited silently on the apron. A P-63 Kingcobra. It looked predatory even at rest. Sleek, compact, built around one brutal idea, a 37mm cannon mounted straight through the propeller hub. The barrel protruded from the spinner like a steel accusation. 58 rounds, each shell capable of tearing an aircraft apart with a single hit. This was not a dogfighter's weapon. It was an executioner's. The Soviet pilot approached slowly. He wore a heavy leather coat stiff with frost, fur collar crusted with ice, helmet scarred and patched. His face told its own story, burn marks along the cheekbone, a pale line running from jaw to ear where shrapnel had once passed too close. His eyes were flat, experienced, unreadable. A major. Eastern Front. Mitchell knew what that meant. This man had survived Stalingrad, Kursk, hundreds of sorties where air combat wasn't about elegance or tactics, but survival measured in seconds. He'd probably been shot down more than once. Probably watched friends burn. The major walked around the P-63, hands gliding over the aluminum skin, tapping panels, checking seams. When he reached the nose, he paused. He touched the cannon barrel, said something quietly in Russian. The interpreter, a young lieutenant from Vladivostok who looked like he hadn't slept in weeks, translated with a thin smile. He says, "This one speaks loudly." Mitchell nodded. "Yes," he said. "It does." They climbed into the cockpit together. Mitchell squeezed awkwardly behind the seat where ammunition boxes normally sat. The instrument panel was already labeled in Cyrillic, part of the Lend-Lease agreement. Oil pressure, boost, mixture, cannon counter. When Mitchell pointed out the ammunition indicator, 58 rounds remaining, the major finally smiled. Not a friendly smile, a professional one. The demonstration flight lasted 20 minutes. Mitchell took off first in another Kingcobra, the Soviet pilot tucked in close behind. They climbed to 8,000 feet, cold air hammering the canopies. Rolls, high-speed dives, steep turns. The P-63 wasn't graceful, but it was stable, solid, built to absorb punishment and keep flying. The Soviet pilot pushed harder than Mitchell expected. 7 gs in a climbing turn. Mitchell's vision tunneled, stars flickering at the edges. These men flew like they assumed death was inevitable. Might as well demand everything before it arrived. When they landed, the major climbed out, pulled off his gloves, and shook Mitchell's hand with bone-crushing strength. Through the interpreter, he said, "Americans build good machines, but you fly them like accountants. We fly them like killers." Mitchell didn't argue. He watched the P-63 taxi away toward the staging line, where dozens more waited to be ferried west, to Germany, to Japan, to somewhere Mitchell would never see. He would never know if that pilot survived the war. That was the nature of the Alsab route. Deliver the aircraft. Watch them vanish into history. Fly back alone. That night in the mess hall, eating beet soup and black bread, Mitchell listened to Soviet stories that made the European air war feel small. Tank battles with thousands of vehicles. Cities starved for years. Pilots ramming bombers when ammunition ran out. This wasn't the war Americans fought. This was extinction. 3 weeks later. Same route. Different pilot. Lieutenant Robert Chun sat alone in his Kingcobra over Alaska, ice coating the wings so thick it blurred his vision. The de-icing boots had failed 50 miles back. He dove repeatedly, trading altitude for warmer air, watching the ice slew off just fast enough to keep the aircraft flying. The P-63 handled like a drunk elephant under all that weight. But it stayed in the air. That was the Bell fighter's secret. They weren't pretty. They were stubborn. The weather briefing for the Bering crossing had been pure nightmare. 70-mile-per-hour winds, blowing snow, visibility measured in yards. Normal pilots would wait. ALSA pilots didn't have that luxury. Every delay meant Soviet pilots flying inferior machines against German veterans. Chen took off at 0400, climbing through cloud so dense it felt like tunneling through cotton. Instruments were his only reality. Compass unreliable this far north. Magnetic variation a liar. Navigation by time, speed, faith. At 15,000 feet, he broke into sunlight. Below him stretched nothing but white, clouds like frozen ocean foam. Somewhere under it lay 60 miles of water that would kill him in 3 minutes if he went down. Fuel margin, razor thin. When the Siberian coast finally appeared, Chen felt relief hit like heat. Land. Cold, hostile, unforgiving land. But land. He followed a flickering radio beacon toward Providencia Bay, then on to Markovo. The landing strip was packed snow over permafrost, slicker than ice, harder than concrete. His Kingcobra slid sideways before the tires bit. Soviet ground crew swarmed him, bundled in layers until they looked inhuman. Inside the operations shack, Chen stood near a glowing stove while a Soviet captain poured him tea so strong it felt corrosive. They spoke in fragments, gestures, shared experience. Chen explained quirks. Yaw and steep climbs. Cannon recoil. How the aircraft wanted to be flown. The captain listened carefully. These details mattered. They meant survival. Far away, in Japan, Lieutenant Kazuo Yamada read intelligence reports about American fighters appearing in Soviet markings. The P-63 Kingcobra, faster than the old P-39, heavier cannon. He wasn't impressed. They flew zeros. They danced. They killed. American aircraft were heavy, soulless things. What Yamada didn't know was that Soviet pilots remembered cock and GOL. They knew never to turn with Japanese fighters. They knew speed and altitude were life. Major Victor Klov had learned those lessons fighting Germans. Now he taught them again. Do not duel, he told his pilots. This is not honor. This is murder. They trained all winter. Boom and zoom. Precision fire. One pass. One kill. The cannon would do the rest. The first encounter came in April 1945. 6 Japanese fighters crossed the Amur River. 4 Zeros. 2 Hayabusas. Confident. Experienced. 8 P-63s came out of the sun at 400 miles per hour. The attack lasted 3 minutes. Klov's first burst erased a zero from existence. Not damaged, deleted. Fuel tanks ignited. Wings folded. Nothing left but fire and debris. Another P-63 lined up a deflection shot. The computing gun sight did the math. 1 shell struck behind the cockpit. The Japanese fighters ceased to be an aircraft. The survivors dove away. They were not chased. The lesson had been delivered. The 37mm cannon changed everything. Soviet pilots had flown fighters armed with machine guns for years. Machine guns required closeness, patience, and luck. You had to close to knife range, hold the trigger, walk the stream of bullets across aluminum skin, and hope the enemy didn't return the favor first. The P-63 did not ask for closeness. It asked for distance and discipline. 58 rounds. That was all. Each shell weighed nearly 2 pounds and carried enough explosive to destroy an aircraft with a single hit. The recoil alone could slow the Kingcobra by several miles per hour, enough to throw off aim if a pilot wasn't ready. Fire too long, and you wasted ammunition. Fire at the wrong moment, and you missed entirely. So Soviet pilots learned to fire once. Senior Lieutenant Pavel Dmitriev returned from one mission having expended exactly 3 rounds. His victory board showed 3 aircraft destroyed. No damage. No pursuit. Just 3 passes, 3 flashes, 3 empty spaces where enemy fighters had been. This is not fighting, Dmitriev told a young pilot afterward. This is accounting. The Japanese learned quickly and painfully. Lieutenant Takashi Nakamura wrote in his diary after his squadron's first encounter with the Kingcobra. We no longer laugh at American aircraft. The Russians fly them like demons. Suzuki was hit from far away. I saw the shell coming like a growing black star. Then there was no Suzuki. By July 1945, Soviet P-63 units in Manchuria were achieving kill ratios exceeding 6-1. These were not inexperienced pilots. Many had hundreds of combat hours against the Luftwaffe. They understood energy fighting instinctively. They did not chase. They did not turn. They struck once and climbed away, leaving wreckage and fear behind them. Major Victor Klov refined the method into something colder. He called it the carousel. P-63s attacked in sequence, never all at once. One aircraft dove, fired, climbed. As the Japanese turned to respond, another attacked from a different angle. Then another. Then another. The formation never slowed. The enemy never recovered. In one engagement near Khabarovsk, Klov's regiment destroyed 11 Japanese aircraft without loss. The Japanese pilots never understood where the attacks were coming from, only that every time they tried to fight back, someone exploded. Japanese countermeasures failed. They added cockpit armor, only to lose speed. They changed formations, only to present better targets. They attempted night interceptions, only to lose aircraft to terrain and weather. On August 8, 1945, the day the Soviet Union formally entered the war against Japan, Captain Ichiro Yamamoto attempted one last coordinated interception. 12 Ki-84 Hate fighters, Japan's best remaining aircraft, climbed to meet a formation of P-63s escorting bombers. Yamamoto ignored the bombers and went straight for the fighters. For a moment, it worked. 2 Kingcobras fell under concentrated machine gun fire. Then the Soviet pilots turned into the attack. They kept their speed above 300 miles per hour, using vertical maneuvers instead of horizontal turns. The fight became brutal and short. 1 Ki-84 disintegrated when a 37mm shell entered its engine. Another lost its cockpit entirely. Lieutenant Tanaka's aircraft burned as he screamed over the radio, trapped inside when the canopy jammed. Yamamoto shot down 1 P-63. It was his last victory. When he disengaged, only 4 of his 12 fighters were still airborne. The Soviets lost 3. They completed their mission. Afterward, Soviet pilots began repeating a saying. The 37 speaks once. The enemy listens forever. The fear spread faster than the damage. Japanese pilots who survived encounters with Kingcobras reported trembling hands, sleeplessness, inability to fly. Mechanics watched men climb from intact aircraft unable to speak. 1-0 landed with a shell hole 6 inches from the pilot's head. The explosion behind his seat destroyed the radio and oxygen system, but spared his life. He never flew again. The P-63 was not just a fighter. It was a psychological weapon. By mid-August 1945, the skies over Manchuria no longer belonged to Japan. They belonged to silence. Japanese airfields sat half-empty. Fuel trucks stood abandoned. Aircraft were hidden under trees, camouflaged not from bombs, but from fear. Pilots who had once begged for combat now claimed mechanical failures rather than face the Soviet fighters with the long-nosed cannon. On August 14th, one day before Japan's official surrender, the last significant air engagement took place. A mixed Japanese force of 20 aircraft, Zeros, Ki-84s, and older Ki-43s, attempted to strike Soviet ground forces advancing through northern Korea. They were intercepted by 16 P-63s from the 888th Fighter Regiment, led by Major Nikolai Gerasimov, a triple ace with 41 confirmed victories. The battle was over in less than 8 minutes. The Kingcobras attacked from altitude, perfectly spaced, each pilot assigned a target. There was no chaos, no shouting on the radio, no chasing. Just brief flashes from the nose, short recoil jolts, and aircraft vanishing from the sky. 6 Japanese fighters were destroyed in the first pass. Another 8 fell during the second. Lieutenant Masao Yamada, flying his 10th combat mission, later wrote in a letter found after the war. They came from above like hawks. Ito's plane vanished beside me. I pulled every maneuver I knew, but they would not turn with us. They climbed away, then returned. This was not a duel. This was execution. Only 6 Japanese aircraft escaped. The Soviets lost 1 to ground fire during the pursuit. On August 15th, Japan surrendered. The war in the Far East ended not with a final heroic stand in the air, but with grounded aircraft, empty runways, and pilots who could no longer bring themselves to fly. Even after the surrender, isolated clashes continued. On August 20th, Captain Vladimir Mikhailov shot down a Ki-43 attacking a Soviet transport. The Japanese pilot insisted he had never received orders to stop fighting. 1 cannon shell removed the fighter's engine. It was the last recorded P-63 air-to-air victory of the war. The final numbers were staggering. In just weeks of combat, Soviet P P-63 units claimed over 500 confirmed aerial victories against Japanese aircraft, with fewer than 90 losses. Entire enemy squadrons ceased to exist. Japanese air power in Manchuria and Korea collapsed completely. But numbers could not describe what the Kingcobra truly represented. It was not beautiful. It was not elegant. It was not forgiving. It was a tool, designed by American engineers, delivered by American ferry pilots across frozen oceans, and perfected by Soviet veterans who had survived the most brutal air war in history. To them, the P-63 was not a fighter. It was a verdict. Major Victor Klov, standing beside his aircraft after the war, summarized it simply. The Japanese believed air combat was poetry. We believed it was physics. Physics always wins. The P-63 Kingcobra was never celebrated like the Spitfire or the Mustang. It never gained fame in American service. Most were scrapped, melted down, forgotten. But for the pilots who faced it, and those who flew it, the memory never faded. A single cannon, a single shot, an aircraft erased from the sky. That was the sound of the old air war ending and the modern one beginning.